This is homework set 12, factoring trinomials. Question 1 asks us to factor this trinomial. Now, first of all, I notice there is nothing common to all three, so I can't factor out any greatest common factor. So I'm going to start by writing the two sets of parentheses, anticipating I can do this. Now, the leading coefficient here, that's this coefficient here, right? The coefficient, the multiplier of the highest term, is a 1. So here's what I'm going to do. How do I get a y squared? Well, I'm going to get a y squared by a y and a y. Now, the question is, how do I get a 28 and an 11? The 28 comes from multiplication. The 11 comes from addition. So what I'm going to look at here is, how do I get a 28 by multiplication? I can get 28 times 1. Now, here's why I do this. This is even, so I cut in half and double. So if I cut in half, I'll get 14 times 2, still even, cut in half and double, 7 and 4. Now I can't divide the 7 anymore. So these are the only ways that I can multiply two numbers and get a 28. So I'm asking, what numbers am I going to put here and here so that when I multiply them together, I get that 28. Now, all these are the ways I can get that 28. However, I want these two numbers not only just to multiply to give me 28, but they have to add up to give 11. So which one of these, if you add, which pair adds to 11? It's a 7 and the 4. So that's how I'll get it. I'll put a 7 and a 4. Now, the order doesn't matter. I could have done this. I could have put a 4 and a 7. Doesn't matter. And I notice this, that the 28 is positive. So positive. So when I multiply two numbers, I get a positive. So the only way that can happen is if I get a positive and a positive, or a negative and a negative. So they have to have the same sign, right? If you get a positive number, these two numbers have to have the same sign, and that sign is going to be that plus sign. There we go. We got the factored form. And you can check it by multiplying it out. There's y squared. Here's 7y plus 4y is 11y, and then plus 28. Now here in question 2, we've got r squared minus 7r plus 10. I don't see anything common all the way through, and the leading coefficient is a 1. So nothing is common, so I have no greatest common factor to take out. So write the two sets of parentheses, anticipating we can do this. First up, how do we get this r squared? Well, the r squared is going to come from multiplying an r with an r. So I'll put those in my first two positions. Now the second question is, what two numbers do I multiply to get a 10? Then when I add or subtract, I get a 7. So these numbers are going to go here. So what two numbers do I multiply together to get a 10? That'll give me a 7 when I add them together. Well, why don't we just try this first? Here's a 10. How many ways can you get a 10 multiplying? 10 and a 1. Now what I do is, this is even, so I divide by 2. I cut in half and double. I get 5 times 2. Now can you see it here? 5 times 2, if I add those together, that'll give me a 7. So I'm going to use the 5 and the 2. Now, I multiply these two numbers together. That gives me a 10, but it has to be a positive 10. So these two numbers have to have the same sign, right? If they have the same sign, you multiply, you get a positive. And that sign is going to be that negative sign right there. So we'll get r minus 5 times r minus 2. That is our factored form. Question number 3 is to factor r squared minus 5r minus 14. Now, right away I notice that the leading coefficient is a 1, and there's nothing common all the way through. No r's all the way through, and no common number this all the way through. So I'm going to write my two sets of parentheses, anticipating I can do this. And because the leading coefficient is a 1, I can just write an r and an r. Now ask yourself, what two numbers can you multiply together to give 14? That when you add together will give a 5. Now you can probably see it, but I'll write it here. 14, I can get a 14 times 1, cut in half and double, 7 and a 2. Both those pairs will give me 14s. But from the 7 and the 2, if I subtract them, I can get a 5. So I'm going to use that 7 and the 2. But now a big question is that I need this to be a negative 14. So to get a negative, these two numbers have to have different signs, right? Positive times negative, negative times positive is a negative. So these two numbers have to have opposite signs. Now one way to do it is just to guess. Or how about if you do it this way? Look at that middle sign right there. It's a negative. Associate this sign with the bigger of these two products. Now here's what I mean. That inner product is 7r. The outer product is only 2r. This inner product is bigger. So I want that to dominate. So put that negative sign with the bigger product. So I'm going to write that negative sign right here. That'll give me negative 7 plus 2 is a negative 5. And just run a quick check. R squared. Here's 2r, but then minus 7r brings us to negative 5r, and negative 7 times positive 2 is negative 14. Question 4. Let's factor a squared plus a minus 42, and I notice right away the leading coefficient is 1, and there's nothing common all the way through, right? No numbers common all the way through, and no variables all the way through. So I'm going to write the two parentheses, anticipating I can do this. And to get the a squared, to get that a squared, I'm going to use an a and an a. So we'll start here with an a and an a, and now we need that 42. I need a number here in the second positions. I need a number here and here. Then when I multiply together, I get a 42. Now, here's what I'm thinking. A 42, I can get like this. 42 times 1. I want all the factors. Now, it's even, so I'm going to cut in half and double. I'll get 21 and 2. Now, it's not even, so I can't cut in half, but I can divide it by 3. So if I divide it by 3 and triple, I'll get 7 and 6. Oh, I see it now, right? 7 and 6. I can get a 1 out of that. If I add these two together, or subtract them actually, I can get that 1. So I'm looking for two numbers that when I multiply together, I get 42, but when I add them or combine them by adding or subtracting, I'll get that 1. So I can use a 7 and a 6, or a 6 and a 7. Order doesn't matter. Now, I want this to be positive, and this, when I multiply, has to be negative. So these two numbers have to have opposite signs. One positive, one negative. So which one do I make positive? Which one do I make negative? Well, look at this sign right here. Put that sign with the bigger of the two products. Now, here's what I mean. The inner product is 7a. The outer product is only 6a. This one is bigger. So put this plus sign with the bigger one. All right, so I'm going to put that plus here, and then I can see it plus 7 minus 6 is plus 1. There we go. Question 5. Let's factor y squared plus 6y plus 8. Leading coefficient is a 1. No factors common. So I'm going to write the two sets of parentheses, anticipating that I can do this. The y squared will get the y and a y. Now, what do you want to use for an 8? For an 8, I can use an 8 and a 1. Now, 8 and 1, I can't get a 6 out of that if I add or subtract. If I add or subtract, I can't get a 6 out of an 8 and a 1. But a 4 and a 2, I can. So I'm going to use a 4 and a 2. So a 4 and a 2, and the 8 is positive. So these two numbers, 4 and 2, have the same sign, and that sign is going to be that middle plus sign. And sure enough, if I check it, y times y is y squared. Outer product is 2y, inner product is 4y, 2y and 4y is 6y, and then 4 times 2 is 8. I think we've got it. And that's the end of this first group of problems in exercise homework set 12.